So let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. We know that Mr. Crutcher's on his way, so that'll even be a bonus. You want to call the roll?
I certainly will. Sue Burton.
Here.
Laura Bellin.
Present.
David Harrington. Christopher Westerman.
Here.
Matthew Crutcher. Gary Waters.
Here.
Elizabeth Gooden.
Here.
Alice Kelly.
She's here.
Alice Kelly.
Here.
Derek Challenger.
Present.
Solomon Ashby.
Here.
Libby Gooden.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
All right, thank you very much. Shall we jump right in if you all are ready? I don't want to hold you up at all.
Absolutely.
And you've had a chance, I think, to meet most everybody. And I don't know if Alice told you that she's brought some of her staff in.
She had mentioned that, yes.
So,
Yeah. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. And we have Brian Birnbaum from Greystone on. Brian, you can hear us all right?
Yep, loud and clear. Thanks.
All right. Perfect. Thank
Hi,
you.
it's Jim with me on as well.
Hey, Jim. Good morning. Tom Shanley.
good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
All right. Well, thanks for having us a little bit off cycle here. We certainly appreciate it. With me today, and again, my name's Tom Shanley, for those I haven't had the chance to introduce myself to. I'm a relationship manager with John Hancock. I've been working with the city of Portsmouth in the retirement system pretty much from the inception and when it came over to our organization, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of, I believe, around 8 years now. So appreciate having us again. It's always good to be here. Today, we're primarily here to give the annual valuation update, and Andre Stewart, who is the assigned actuary, gets the honor to kind of go through all of that detail and give you all an update and take any questions. So with that said, I'm going to hand things over to Andre.
Thanks, Tom. I am going to, as Tom mentioned, provide an update on the July 1, 2017 valuation, but I'll start with an overview of the systems. Feel free to ask me any questions as we proceed. So the systems were both effective in the 1950s. They subsequently froze participation in 1984 and 1995, respectively, for the Supplemental and FPRS. So current hires do go into the Virginia retirement system. Up until 2016, city council members were still participating and eligible to participate in the supplemental system, but that has changed effective December of 2016. Benefits are provided upon 3 different contingencies: upon retirement, disability, as well as death. There's also a service-connected death for those participants in the fire and police system. I'm on slide 4 now. Just a quick summary of the benefits under fire and police. Retirement benefits are payable after 20 years of service or upon the attainment of age 50 with 5 years of service. The benefits are based upon the final average compensation, and that's the highest 36 consecutive months. You take an average of that, and that is the final average compensation that's used for determining the benefits. And then the final benefits are based on a percentage of that final average compensation. Each year that a participant works, they get a certain percentage. So for the first 20 years of service, fire and police participants get 3% for each year of service. For the next 5 years, they receive 2% of compensation, and any years of service beyond that, they receive an additional percent. So for 30 years of service, they will receive 75% of their final average compensation. In addition, for those employees that retire prior to 65, they receive a supplemental benefit of $200 per month that will cease at the age of 65. For those folks in the supplemental system, retirement is also at age 50 with 5 years of service. Retirement benefits similarly are based upon a final average compensation based on the final 36 or the highest 36 months of compensation. And all years of service are credited at 2%. So after 20 years of service, they will receive a benefit equal to 40% of compensation. Similarly, these participants that retire prior to 65 will receive a $200 per month supplement up until the age of 65. Any questions?
I should probably know this, but on the fire and police, when did the 321 start? It's not everybody that got that. There was.
It's been in place since we've been working with the plan. I haven't seen any change to the code that would indicate that there was, or the time at which it changed.
Okay. Because my understanding that 321 wasn't always the plan, and I don't know, I'm turning to Libby to see if she knows, but wasn't there a different plan that fire and police were under for a little bit?
So,
Yes, for a little
Okay.
bit of period of time, yes.
Okay.
is it possible that the fire and police became effective a few years after supplemental? Is it possible that they participated in the plan for all city employees prior to the fire and police
No.
coming into
I don't
effect?
think it was in effect when I was first on the board, so I'm thinking sometime late 80s, early 90s.
That the
That's a
321 came on board.
guesstimate, though. and-
So when and I guess what I'm trying to get at is, when it first came 321, the people that retired already were not on the 321. They didn't get grandfathered into that.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, they were
They were
grandfathered
in it.
They were.
Yes.
Oh, all right. That's
But I
what
was one of them.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So if this started, let's just say 1980,
State
anybody that
Yes, there was. Yes, there was.
So if anybody retired in, if the 321 started, let's say in 1980, if somebody retired in 1977 and they were making a benefit, would their benefit change to the 321 benefit?
Everyone that was on the police and fire department at that particular time converted over to a 321.
That was an active employee. What if they had been retired already?
If they retired, they
Retired, they wouldn't get it.
they wouldn't have gotten it. But if you were actively employed at that time,
Yeah.
all of them went into the 321.
Yeah.
Because it was so lucrative, there was no reason.
Well, it
not
made sense to go. But the retirees, so there are some retirees that are getting, fire and police retirees that are getting pensions that really weren't under the 321, that had a different plan.
Right.
Would that make a difference in your actuary calculations?
So we'd be reflecting those benefits. If they were receiving those benefits, they wouldn't have changed, presumably. So those
already have them,
Those
so
are the
it wouldn't have
benefits that we're
changed.
those are the benefits that we're valuing for the
Okay.
valuation.
Thank you very much. Sure. That's what I was trying to get at.
Okay, on slide 7, a review of participation in each of the systems. Since plan participation has been frozen, as you would anticipate, the numbers have decreased. Most notably, under the fire and police, the active participation has decreased by more than 50% over the past 2 years, but starting with such a small base of 48, any change in participation is going to be significant percentage-wise. But this is what we would anticipate, given that there are no future employees coming into the plan. Similarly, on slide 8, for the supplemental system, the participation hasn't dropped as significantly, but the only change that we're really seeing is for participants that have deceased and no longer receiving a benefit. And before we launch into financial results, just a brief overview of some of the actuarial definitions. First is the actuarial value of assets. That is the definition of the assets that we use for the valuation, as opposed to the market value of assets that you would see in a trust report if you were to open it up. The actuarial value of assets you can think of as a smooth or average of the current year's value as well as the 4 prior valuation dates' values. And the reason that's used is because it's designed to smooth out any volatility in the market, as well as creating a more predictable contribution pattern year over year. So you will see a difference between the actual value of assets and the market value of assets. The actual accrued liability, that is the liability that we use for determining the contributions, and that is just the present value of benefits that are due today. So if, in theory, if you wanted to settle the benefits with an insurance company, that is the amount you would have to pay to the insurance company to remove those liabilities off of your balance sheet. And the unfunded actuarial accrued liability is just the difference between the actuarial value of assets and the liability. The funded status is another way to look at the health of the plan, similar to the unfunded actuarial liability, but instead of looking at the difference between those two measures, we're dividing those two measures and looking at a percentage. And finally, the actuarially determined contribution is similar to what we used to report previously, the annual required contribution, and that is the suggested or recommended contribution that should be made on an annual basis to fund the benefits today as well as in the future. Questions? Okay. Slide 10. The actual determined contribution is comprised of two different components. One is the normal contribution, and that is the present value of benefits that are being accrued in the current year. And since that is only attributable to active employees, and active employees are a significant minority of the plan, that is a very small component of the overall contribution. The much larger component is the accrued liability contribution, and that is an amortization of the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. So we look at the assets and the liabilities. The difference between the two, we amortize over 19 years, at least for 2017. That amortization period is decreasing annually. So it started at 30 years in 2007. It is now down to 19 years. And in each subsequent year, that amortization period will become shorter. So you'll be the payment of that unfunded benefit will be accelerated in future years. Some of the key assumptions that go into the valuation, maybe the most key assumption is the discount rate of 7.25%. So that is the rate that we use to discount and calculate the liabilities. Probably has the most influence on the value of the liabilities. The 7.25% is based on the expected rate of return on the assets. So whatever the expected rate of return on the assets is, which is 7.25%, we assume liability performance will be in line with the assets. So we also use 7.25% for purposes of discounting the benefits and determining a liability. Maybe second most significance is the mortality table. I think since 2012, we've been using the same table that is required by the IRS for corporate plans. The IRS on an annual basis updates that table, typically nominally, and I'll talk a little further about the update that is in place for 2018. There was no COLA for 2017, so no significant changes in the benefit provisions. Thoughts or questions? Okay. So reviewing the assets for each of the plan, I mentioned that there's the market value of assets. That's the value that you would see if you were to open up your trust report, as well as the actuarial value of assets, which we use for the valuation and determining the contributions. For 2017, or as of July 1, 2017, the market value of assets was about $171 million, and the actuarial value of assets was just under $176 million. And when you see that the actuarial value of assets exceeds the market value, that generally means that the assets have underperformed expectations over the prior 5-year period. So we use an expectation of 7.25% for annual asset return. Since over that period, assets have slightly underperformed that, so you see an actuarial value of assets that's slightly ahead of the market value. You'll note that the difference between the actual value of assets and the market value of assets in 2016 was about $11 million. That difference is about $5 million due to the better than expected performance from 2016 to 2017, an estimated return of 10.66% versus 7.25%. And on slide 12, similar story for the supplemental system. Since they are invested similarly, the actual value of assets is slightly ahead of the market value of assets, but not by as much as it was in 2016, again, because of the better than anticipated performance between 2016 and 2017.
And that could flip. The market value of assets could be higher than the actuarial value if we're been overperforming the 7.25 in the past 5 years.
Absolutely. That's what we'd like to see.
Of course.
Yeah. But this relationship is actually very common, even on the corporate side. This is what we typically see at this point in time, that the actual value of assets has exceeded the market value just because over a longer period of time, assets have generally underperformed our expectations. Now, a comparison of the assets to the liabilities, again, the funded status. The funded status is the actual value of assets divided by the actual accrued liability. We see that over the past 2 years, the funded status has declined from 75.8% to 72.3%. That is due to two primary factors. One is that there was a liability loss of about $1.9 million from 2016 to 2017. So when I speak of a liability loss or asset loss or gain, that generally means that the liabilities, a loss would mean that the liabilities are higher than we anticipated when we moved from 2016 to 2017. The liabilities reflect an estimate of what we anticipate to happen with respect to demographics, as well as other key assumptions. And obviously our key demographics aren't always going to match, or probably never going to match what we anticipate. Folks might live longer than we anticipate. People might retire sooner and receive benefits earlier than we anticipate, thereby increasing the liability. And that's what happened between 2016 and 2017. So the liabilities are about $1.9 million higher than we anticipated. On the asset side, and again, we're using the actuarial value of assets as opposed to the market value, where the market value returned 10.6% from 2016 to 2017. The actuarial value, because we're smoothing in those gains and losses, the return was 6.14%. So lower than we anticipated, lower than the 7.25% anticipation. Therefore, there's an asset loss of $1.8 million year over year.
For the liability loss, you said people are living longer, they could retire sooner.
Mm-hmm.
That we didn't have that many retirements. Really, the majority of this loss probably is people are living longer.
It's actually retirement. So
Oh, it is retirement.
Yeah. So what happens, and we've seen this over the past couple of years, and I've actually considered making a change, but because we have so few retirees now, it's probably not worthwhile. I'll say it is not worthwhile making the change. So we have an assumption that retirees will retire no sooner than age 50. So we assume, say, 10% of retirees will retire at age, or eligible employees will retire at age 50. Those that remain thereafter in age 51, 52, 53, there's another percentage assigned to each of those ages where we assume folks will retire. But in reality, because participants will actually retire sooner than that, since they are actually eligible to retire after 20 years. So if you have someone that retires at age 47 or 48 because they already have the 20 years that's necessary to retire, then we'll have a loss because they're receiving benefits earlier and longer than anticipated. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So we don't see that dynamic nearly as much on the supplemental system, but in the fire and police, we do see it on occasion.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
And is that why the supplemental is
Has
better funding?
That's primarily why. We do, and we're on slide 14 now, we did experience an asset loss similar to what we saw in the fire and police, but no liability loss. And I should say that there's also a very small component of the liability loss is due to the change in the mortality table every year. So that, as I indicated, the IRS updates the mortality table on an annual basis just to take into account improved longevity, the expectation that folks will live longer than we anticipated the prior year.
If I could ask one more question.
Mm-hmm.
For the actuarial, the asset loss, we're experiencing very good returns this year. Mm-hmm. That should drive this 6.1% or 6.4% up a little higher, and we might not have that loss next year. And so the funding status would maybe go up.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So some of the
As long
gains
as people
that-
don't retire, you know.
Well, that's always going to be could be a factor
Right.
on the liability side.
Sure.
But some of the gains that were experienced between 2016 and 2017 on the asset side have been deferred and will flow into the assets in future years.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Slide 15, a summary of the annual determined contribution, actuarially determined contribution, in comparison to the contributions that have been made year over year. And you will see the numbers do match, so that means the city has been putting in what has been actuarially determined, so I applaud you for that. There are many municipalities and states that aren't doing that, so that's a very good policy to follow. The contribution level has increased year over year, but that is what we've anticipated, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. You'll see that the normal contribution, again, that's the contribution attributable to benefits that are accruing in the given year, attributable to active employees, that has declined as the active participation has declined. But the accrued liability contribution has increased, and primarily increased for two reasons. One, the liability loss that I mentioned, as well as the amortization period decreasing year over year. In 2016, the amortization period was 20 years. Now we're amortizing it over 19, and so on and so forth.
The amortization period, is that typical of how people do it? Of how other plans do it?
It is. So some plans just use a flat, a constant amortization period, and if they do, it's over a much shorter timetable. The city adopted this strategy back in 2017, and if we were going to use, I'm sorry, in 2007. I suspect, I wasn't the actuary. Yeah, sorry. I wasn't the actuary at that time, but I suspect if they were going to adopt a policy of using a level amortization period, it would have been a much shorter amortization period, because you just wouldn't have been able to fund the benefits by amortizing the unfunded over a 30-year period. The contributions would have been much too low to support the benefit payments that were being made at that time. And that's actually what we found even years later after 2007, and that was the primary reason behind the obligation bond. The asset level just could not support the benefits that were being paid without either a significant increase in contributions or an infusion in cash, such as the obligation bond. Any other thoughts or questions? No? Okay. A similar dynamic in the supplemental plan, except that the normal contribution level has remained steady because the active participation has remained steady, and the contribution level has pretty much remained between remained around $1.8 million. So we haven't seen the increase on the supplemental side that we've seen on the fire and police side.
So that's 8316755 for the total. 8.3 million,
That sounds about right. Yeah, about 8.3 million.
which is on the next page. I did all that math and
I mentioned that we use the IRS mortality table for determining the liabilities. And that was a policy that was adopted in 2012. Previously, we were using a table that we felt was out of date and needed to be updated. So knowing that the IRS typically updates their table on an annual basis and is in line with expectation, that policy was adopted. The IRS has published a revamped table for use for 2018. So that is a table that all corporate plans will need to use for valuations and determining contributions. It's actually very similar and based on the data for the mortality table that is used for accounting purposes for the city as well as most corporate plans. That table does anticipate even higher longevity than the current table that we're using, and higher longevity means that folks will be receiving benefits for a longer time there, and translates into a higher liability, higher actuarially determined contribution. So if we had used this updated table for 2017, the contribution requirements would have increased from $8.3 million to $9.1 million, and the funded status would have deteriorated by about 2 percentage points. So while this is an informal policy, I don't think there's a requirement for the city to adopt these updated tables that the IRS has introduced. But I do think it does give us, or does represent, a more accurate picture of the plan's financial health, because it takes into account the improved longevity that we're anticipating in the overall population.
Okay, it's not required,
It's not required.
but it does give a better picture of the funding status, and it also increases the amount that the city would have to contribute to keep that funding status.
Yes, it will increase the amount the city will have to contribute in the short term.
Okay. The other thing that I asked Andre when I first got this is, when we did the pension bonds were supposed to get us to about 80% funded, and now we're at 72% funded, which is the biggest part of the plan, the fire and police, and 76% funded for the supplemental plan. And just as for kicks, not for kicks, but for really knowledge,
Gave me a heart attack.
how much would it cost if we were to fund to get it up to 80%? If we were to do that in 1 year, how much would that cost us to get us back up to 80%? And I'm going to let you say the numbers.
Oh, I did not.
Oh,
no,
okay. Well, the numbers are, if we use the old mortality table, it was 22 million or 21.9 million. And the new with using the new mortality table, it would be like close to 29 million, 28 something, as opposed to 8.3 or 9. So we're losing funding status.
And to your
If you could, if you
Yeah,
could.
to your point, I included a projection that we did back in 2013, and these are in the appendix. If you just flip one more page, you'll see each of the projections for F&P as well as the supplemental. And you can see this was done right after the obligation bond was implemented, and you can see that we anticipated this deterioration in funded status. And part of that was due to the way the actuarial value of assets works. So we knew that even if you returned the expected 7.25% on the market value, that the actuarial value of assets would lag that because of all of the losses that had been deferred. And part of it is because of the contribution pattern. We knew early on that there would be a negative flow of assets out of the plan because of the level of benefit payments that were being made. So this is not surprising to us. It may not be ideal, and it might not be ideal from an optics perspective, but the fact that the funded status has declined is pretty much what we anticipated. And the big decrease from 2012 to 2013, again, was primarily because of the actuarial value of assets. So we knew that the actuarial value of assets was going to underperform our 7.25% expectation because of the losses that were flowing into that value that had been deferred previously.
Hey, Andre, can I ask a quick question on the actuarial value of assets? So, in round numbers, the net negative cash flow out of the plans is somewhere around 10%. And so, are we starting with a 10% decline, roughly? I know it's smoothed over a period of 5 years, so maybe it's 2% in any given year. Are we starting with a negative 2% return on the actuarial value of assets because of that negative cash flow?
That's exactly right. So those losses that are being deferred have to be figured into the asset value in future years. So when the actual value of assets again exceeds the market value, at some point we know that those losses are going to flow into the actual value of assets. So we anticipate that the actual value of assets will underperform the market value on an annual basis.
And so a portion, it could be large, it could be small based on what happens in the capital markets, a portion of the decline in the return of the actuarial value of assets is simply a function of the fact that we're paying out a lot more money than we're putting in.
That's true as well.
That's the issue that you referred to is even after the POB issuance, you had expected a deterioration in funded status. Are those two issues related?
They're not related, but they both work to depress both the market value of assets and the actuarial value of assets. And to your point, if you turn to slides 22 and 23, I summarize the inflows and outflows of the plan on an annual basis. The benefit payments are depicted by we'll call it red bar. That's the one outflow, and all of the inflows, whether it's investment return and contributions, are depicted by the blue and green bars, and the net flow to the plan is depicted by the transparent purple bar. And you can see, even in really strong years, the net flow is marginally positive and typically negative just because of the significant benefit payments that are being made on an annual basis. So we anticipated that the asset values would decline in future years, not only because of the deferred losses that are calculated, that are factored into the actuarial value of assets, but also because of the significant benefit payments in comparison to the contributions and expected investment return.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
So as a closed plan, I guess eventually the benefit payments are going to start declining.
That's what we anticipate, correct.
And that's probably another 20 years out.
Right, so it's going to be a ways. So you can see if we turn back to, if we turn back to the projections, the third row of the chart at the bottom of the projections summarizes what we anticipated contribution benefit payments to be in future years, and under F&P, it didn't start declining until 2022. Now again, this is based on results that were prepared in 2012, 2013, so this could change, but this will give you a high-level understanding of what we anticipated the benefit payment pattern to be.
Okay. So when we're amortizing the loss,
Pretty close. I think the F&P paid out about close to 22 million most recent year.
so eventually we're going to get where it turns around and we're going to have to pay less, and our contributions and our interest will come in more. And that'll keep the funding higher.
Right. So at the end of, sorry, continue.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is, you know, while we want to make it 80%, when we issued pension bonds for 80%, us declining in funding, is that not necessarily bad?
Not necessarily bad. Again, because that's what we anticipated, and the combination of the investment return, benefit payments, as well as the contribution pattern, contribution formula, provided us this expectation that the funded status would decline. If we used a more aggressive approach with respect to the formula to determine contributions, that might not have been. One of the things we considered years ago, and this was, I believe, prior to the obligation bond, was just shortening that amortization period, right? Instead of the influx of $160 million, let's shorten the amortization period so that unfunded, instead of being paid out over a 20-year period, let's pay it out over a 10-year period. And that would have increased contributions significantly, but on an ongoing basis as opposed to the one-time obligation bond.
Okay.
So all that to say, the decline in funded status is anticipated, and there should be, and will be, as long as the contribution recommendations are followed, there will be an increase in the funded status, in particular because the amortization period is going to decline. So irrespective of what the unfunded liability is, you're going to be paying a more significant portion of that unfunded liability in future years because you'll be amortizing it over a shorter period of time.
But that's also eating into our general fund budget. And
Understood.
So the more the shorter the amortization period, the more this 8.3 goes to 9 million, 10 million.
Well-
So do we have, and I'm sorry, I probably should have asked this before you came, do we have like anticipation, you know, this is the contribution this year, what about the next 4 or 5
So
years? How do we-
sure. So again, this is based on relatively old data, but the contribution pattern is expected to remain relatively level and decrease in future years because not only is the contribution increasing your assets, but the return should be increasing your assets as well. So they're working in tandem. So in the fire and police, we anticipated that the contributions would remain around $6.3 million. I know they're a little bit higher than that, but not increase beyond that, and then start to decrease out into the late 2020s, and early 2030s.
So if the city made a decision that said, and I'm not saying they are, I'm just hypothetically, we can't afford to increase our contribution, we're going to keep it level as what it was last year. This would further decrease our funding status, and we'd have to make it up more in future years.
Yeah, one of the things I try to relate to people is everything that an actuary, myself, any other actuary does, all that's going to do is determine the timing of payments. The plan costs what it costs. We're not changing what each individual is going to receive. It's just how you pay for those benefits that will be received in future years.
And
How has that stock market boom affected us?
It
Stock
can,
market's supposed to be way up.
yeah, it can only help. So without that, you would have had a higher contribution. Higher contributions would have been required than what you're currently making. So the bull run that we've seen over the past 8 years has helped everyone, right? A rising tide really does, raise all boats, float all boats.
With that said, and Brian, I know you guys talk to this when you're here every quarter, you still want to invest the portfolio appropriate to the fact that a lot of the liability is already built in. So, where you do see market returns over 20%, you're not going to be targeting that here due to the risk.
No, right. So it's striking the right balance between, trying to eke out a little bit extra return relative to that 7.25 to, as much as we can from investments, reduce the ultimate cost of providing those benefits over time, but striking that against downside risk and risk tolerance of the board, and quite frankly, the existing liabilities and cash flow expectations of the plan, which, as I mentioned earlier, we're paying out about, on a net basis after contributions, about 10% of plan assets every year in benefits. So that we take that into account as well and make sure we've got ample liquidity to be able to meet those benefit payments over time. But you're exactly right, Tom. It's striking that balance and trying to reduce the ultimate cost of the plan to the city.
And by having it that we can pay those benefits, we have to take less risk, which means the 20% is not 20% for us, it's less.
Yeah, I think that's difficult sometimes just from the outside looking in. If the public sees this such strong market performance, well, they're assuming why isn't the portfolio matching that?
Right.
Well, it's because of all these other reasons that you need from a fiduciary standpoint. You want to make sure it's appropriate.
I think that summarizes everything that I wanted to communicate. Did I miss anything, or any questions or any topics that folks are interested in that they like to cover?
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else you need us for, or?
Well done.
All right,
Do you have
guys.
any money we can use?
All right, well, thank you very much. Again, appreciate, nice seeing everybody.
Safe
And
trip back.
Thank
yeah,
you.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
I will, we'll be talking, and let me know if anything else comes up with your audit.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys. We're going
We'll see
to,
you in a couple of weeks.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
So,
Have a great day. Bye.
thank you.
Good seeing you, Andre. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Seeing you as well. Appreciate your time.
Glad you're back.
Annual visit.
I've been back for a while. I realize.
Yeah, we missed you for a year or two.
A couple of years.
Was it
Yeah.
Kevin or Keith or something?
Kevin.
Kevin.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was nice, but
Yeah, he's a really good guy.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. See ya.
Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thanks, Alex. I'll be asking more questions, I'm sure, but.
Nothing less.
Okay, thank you.
All right, if we have nothing else, let's go ahead and move on to our regular agenda. Applications for retirement.
What minutes?
I'm sorry. Oh, yep, skipped right
I
over it.
make a motion the minutes be approved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you for catching that. All right, now the applications for retirement.
There are no applications in the supplemental system. In the fire and police retirement systems, we have John C. Morris, who is vested, Ruth Hume, who is now vested. No actual applications for retirement. Under reported deaths and beneficiaries, Charles Cross of Fire and Police passed away in September. There was no death benefit payable. Billy Blackman of Fire and Police passed away in September. 50% spousal annuity payable to Ms. Erlene Blackman.
I thought I saw somewhere that
Oh, what about
number
Ms.
of-
Poland? Was she included last month?
Ms. Pullen,
Yeah.
I believe she was 2 months ago.
Seemed like we discussed her last month, but anyway, okay.
We
Yeah.
discussed the interest aspect of it. That's what we talked about last
Okay.
month. She's been notified.
All right, thank you.
You're very welcome.
We have the number active participants.
I am very sorry, I did not include that. It was the same as last month, which I
Okay.
believe is 20 and 20.
Okay. Just checking. And then the schedule of historic funds flows.
Year to date, we began the year with $230,630,954.83. We have interest income of $220,022.19. We had a retiree service expense of $7,189.98. The recurring benefit payments are, I'm sorry, we had misread my lines. We had a return of benefit payments of $7,189.98. The recurring benefit payments are $5,495,986.06. A realized gain of $137,365.04, and an unrealized gain of $2,102,160.93. We have a net change, which is a loss of $3,029,247.92. Our ending balance, $227,601,706.91. Compared to last year, the same periods, that should say August, I apologize, we are down $2,276,441.58.
Our benefit payments went up $531,000, which I thought was pretty significant.
We did have that supplement that was paid in July.
Okay, then maybe that's why.
Supplement payment was made in July, which could account for that increase of $500,000.
Any questions? All right, we'll move on to unfinished business. Do we have an investment committee report?
We have the RFP, and we had the investment committee, which consists of Matthew Crutcher, David Harrington, and Chris Westerman. And Matthew and David have not, indicated that they wanted to serve on the RFP committee. And so we still have copies of the RFP. And we haven't done the analysis. So I'm not quite sure if they should be on the selection committee for this investment committee. And so I just wanted to let you know that, and I guess maybe we need to make a decision on how we go about doing this. Maybe somebody else should be on the investment committee. I think Ms. Bellin had expressed interest in doing that. So we have the RFPs, we have the responses from different vendors, and it's just taking the time to review the criteria of the RFP to the responses we received and determining which is the best selection to interview. And
we don't need to meet yet. We just need to individually review the packets, and then we can score them and then meet.
I'm not familiar with that, but I'm a quick learner.
Pardon?
No, I was, pardon the sidebar, I was asking Chris what's involved in the committee before I volunteered.
Yeah.
Well, probably similar to what, I mean, you look at each one of the presentations on paper.
He did explain it.
Right.
Yeah.
And then eventually the committee will get together, or not, depending upon how the scoring is done, to decide, who you would, if we want to bring somebody in to interview them, or if we want to, if the choice is obvious because of all factors, or...
Is there a scoring sheet?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well, then that helps.
Yes.
I've got a track.
Madam Chair, if I might, this is operated under the Virginia Public Procurement process. So there is an established process, and actually the procurement officer in the finance department who is marshal all that process for the benefit of you all.
Okay.
And he was actually here last week to, he got the next weeks mixed up, and he's on vacation this week, so he wasn't here to actually go through. But he will be the one that will manage the whole process and will educate and make sure that the process is done properly.
Is there a determined amount of people that need to be on the procurement committee?
Typically, you have 3 people on it. It doesn't have to be 3 people. There's no requirement that it's supposed to be a selection of folks that are knowledgeable and understand the technical aspects of the
So since we're
selection.
having some difficulty with some of the people because of their schedules, et cetera, on the board, is there any problem with having somebody in your office sit on if the board so determines that would be
that
appropriate?
would not be proper. I mean, that would be fine too.
So I think I just wanted to put that thought out there. I mean, I was willing to serve, but I think because being chair and whatever, they felt like it was more appropriate for some other folks to be involved than myself.
Well, and I haven't had a chance to introduce her. I would like to introduce Barbara Dameron. She is our new Assistant Chief Financial Officer, and she started with the city 3 weeks ago?
3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago. Barbara is the former Director of Finance for the City of Roanoke, as also the City of Danville, both of which have their own pension systems. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe Barbara would sit on the panel, and she would have expertise that we could utilize for this panel.
Also on the GFOA committee
I'm sorry.
for retirement and benefits. So we'd be glad. It's your pleasure to serve in that capacity.
Well, do we have a motion from the board, perhaps, to...
So moved.
Second.
Second?
Carrie seconded.
Okay. You get them in there so quickly, Mr. Waters. All right, well, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 So Laura, you have agreed that you'd be willing
Oh,
or not?
I thought she was my stead, honestly.
I mean, I know Mr. Westerman and myself and Barbara.
Yeah, I thought that
mean,
was
if you
the
want
three.
Laura, that's fine
Okay,
too.
okay.
I had suggested, I remember the other time.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
You had
You're
said
right.
something.
I have to go.
Okay.
I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Westerman.
Yes.
All right,
I'm going to
so-
go ahead and give him I'm going to take you upstairs and get you.
Okay.
Okay. So that sounds a very good solution.
Yes, thank you
To
for the
that.
suggestion.
Has everybody had a chance to read the bylaws? They are, as she sent them out late yesterday afternoon. They do have some of the corrections that we had requested in the past.
The one I noted that didn't change, and I know that Alice said she was going to check to see what the city requirement was. The manner of voting, it still says it's by roll call.
Right.
And that you have to record the yeas and nays, so.
I don't know if she had a chance to run that by you, Mr. Ashby, to double check whether or
I
not.
remember the issue. I believe the charter requires that, if I'm not mistaken, but I will check and see if I can't give you a definitive answer before we depart today. But I think that was the issue, is the charter may have required that it be recorded.
Okay.
And that would override.
The city charter.
The city charter, correct.
But you saw nothing else? Anybody saw anything
No.
else?
I didn't. That's my only comment.
Well, we no longer have a quorum, but unless Matthew shows up at the last minute, but so we
So it's
can let
pending
it.
anyway.
We can let it rest till November after Mr. Ashby's had a chance to double check that. And that takes a little pressure off of you right now.
Okay.
If
That
the
small
internet is not working as quickly as you would like for it, but please,
Right.
everybody, do take a look. And then, Gail, can you report on C, the record retention policy status? Is that basically what it says on the?
Yes, it is on hold. Right now, we are in the middle of the annual audit. We're in the middle of getting the CAFR done. So right now, we really don't have time to put towards that to try and finish it up. But it's still on the list of things that do need to get done.
Okay, since from now on, we're basically on an informational status here. The new business, there was an issue with the agenda for the upcoming meeting, or just something you wanted to bring to our attention, or?
Alice added that.
Okay. And?
I believe what she wants to do is find some time, since the actuarial report has just been done, find some time when we can get in front of City Council to present the funding and the benefits information to have them better understand. But she's here and she can explain it. We have gone to the new business. And you added that, so I'm not sure.
Yes, the city manager had mentioned that as part of the retirement board's responsibility is to recommend to city council the funding status, not the funding status, but the funding contribution, as well as make recommendations for benefits. Now, whether council's responsibility is to determine the benefits and whatnot, but the retirement board can make recommendations if they so choose to. And one of her comments to us was, does the retirement board have any recommendations for FY19 budget? So what we thought is, this is the actuary report. Obviously, the funding status is lower than last year, the contribution for the city is higher, and in order to keep the same funding status. So typically, I would think the recommendation would be to contribute what the actuary mentioned to us. I mean, you could always say the city contribute more, the city contribute less. I mean, it's what the board determines. But you know, the city council should hear from the retirement board, who deals with what the benefits and the funding and the payments are, what their recommendations are for contributions for FY19.
Wouldn't that be done during the budget process by finance?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's done in FY19 budget, so we're we're starting to do the operating budget for FY19. And so what we said is we can have this on the agenda for next month to just discuss if the retirement board wants to make recommendations for what was in the budget. And you'd make recommendations to city council as well as the city manager.
That makes sense.
Well, we had a work session last year. We were part of a work session. Would it be basically the same?
You could ask for a work session with city council before the budget is finalized.
But we can discuss that when we have a quorum. Is anybody coming in November, or was that scheduled for December for the next?
I believe Greystone is expected to be here next month.
The investment committee.
Right.
That's November.
So that's why I wanted to, make sure we had
a quorum.
Yeah. And perhaps we don't have to meet in December. We'll see.
Okay.
I'll wait till at the end. Anything else on that? All right. And the audit results?
That's an agenda for the upcoming meeting.
Okay.
November 9th, we should have at least the financial statements to give to you. They're probably not going to be finalized until December, but we can give you a pro forma that is unaudited. Most of it will be audited. If you don't want to meet in December, we could always have the auditor come in January to present it if you'd like. I don't think you've had the auditors come in and present financial results to the board, and you don't have to have that, but it's just saying that you could.
Why not?
Okay.
Parking passes.
Yeah, the parking passes, have you had a chance?
I requested them immediately after the meeting last month, and I received a call about 2 weeks ago from the individual who does them, who said, "Did I get those to you yet?" I said, "No, you have not. We have a meeting in 2 weeks. I really need those." And I had not heard anything back from her. I sent her another, and I thought about it last night on my way home. I sent her another email this morning and said, "I will get a question from them about these. Where are they? Please call me on my cell phone." And she has not called me. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer yet. But as soon as I have them, I will send everybody an email so that you know they're here, and you can let me know how you want me, if you're going to stop by, or how you want me to get them to you.
Just a quick informational. I happened to see Vice Mayor Cherry at an event on Tuesday, who is the person who handles appointments to the boards, and I expressed our concern that we are still seeking additional members for the retirement board, and that even though the number of participants has been reduced from 9 to 7, that we're still sometimes having difficulty making a quorum. And I asked him if he wanted me to send him a letter to that effect, and he said no, just shoot him an email. And he already had 1 or 2 people in mind, so there's a good possibility that we might be seeing a replacement member in the next month or 2. So we'll keep our fingers crossed, but I will shoot him an email to remind him about it and see if we can get some applications in for this board, so we won't have to struggle every month in having a quorum. So Does anybody else have anything else? All righty.
The bylaws, did you talk about that? I sent those out last night. I apologize
Yes.
for not sending it out sooner, but I guess next month when we have a quorum.
Right, there was just the one question as to whether or not a roll call was determined to be necessary in the charter, and Mr. Ashby's going to take the opportunity, since we didn't have a quorum to actually vote on it. We'll table it till next month.
Thank you.
If there's no other business, I call the meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
9